Walter Benjamin was a German Jewish philosopher born July 15, 1892. While he was focused on literature, poetry, and theater, writing reflections on Brecht, Krauss, and Kafka, he was also a fierce social critic who took the mystical character of art as a way to understand our political and ethical commitments. While born sickly, often in desperate financial straits, and underappreciated by the traditional academy, Benjamin struck a chord with political activists and philosophers who valued his social critique via art, in combination with his Marxist and mystic sensibilities. In the same breath, Benjamin could go from a critique of surrealism to a conversation about wealth inequality represented through artistic trends to an appreciation for the aura and energy of art. For Benjamin, a great storyteller will always be rooted in the people. Throughout his life, Benjamin operated in many academic circles. He lived with playwright and philosopher Bertolt Brecht, he was invited to join Georges Bataille's secret society in France during the rise of Hitler, and he even spent time trying to develop a left-wing magazine for various social critics to get their ideas out. Benjamin was exceptionally privileged, in the same way most academics and Marxists of the 20th century were. Thus, he often reflected on the relationship this class of the bourgeois had to the people that they were siding with, simultaneously sympathetic and completely out of touch with the plight of the people. That said, Benjamin was still Jewish, and thus suffered tragedy after tragedy in Nazi Germany. In 1931, he wrote an essay titled Unpacking My Library, where he reflected on the mental process of the collector. He wrote, "To a book collector, you see, the true freedom of all books is somewhere on his shelves." That same collection of books he so prized would later be taken away from him in the process of fleeing Europe. In 1939, he was put in a French concentration camp designed for German Jewish refugees. While eventually released, Benjamin lamented the loss of his home and valuables. In 1940, Benjamin attempted to enter Spain as a refugee, but was turned away. Fearing that Nazi officials would find and imprison him again, he killed himself on September 27, 1940. According to Hannah Arendt, the tragedy was that one day earlier, Benjamin would have got through without any trouble. One day later, the people of Marseille would have known that for the time being, it was impossible to pass through Spain. Only on that particular day was the catastrophe possible. Following his death, much of Benjamin's work and legacy were preserved by two of his closest friends, Hannah Arendt and Theodor Adorno. The former was a student of Heidegger, dealing primarily in political philosophy. She wrote Origins of Totalitarianism, which diagrams the various ways totalitarian regimes operate, a book which spiked in sales after the election of Donald Trump. Equally important, she wrote a report on the Nuremberg trials titled Imrich in Jerusalem, where she detailed the character of evil as not a mustache-twirling obvious archetype, but rather as something banal, normalized. The latter was a founder of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, known for everything from a deep critique of the Enlightenment to the culture industry to an updated Marxism that answers the questions of a failed revolution. However, whereas Adorno and Arendt achieved a following outside of academic circles, Benjamin remains somewhat forgotten, despite the efforts of his friends. In my undergraduate and graduate study in philosophy, I was only ever taught Benjamin once, and even then, all of my professors only admitted to having passing familiarity with that one famous essay, and nothing more. In contrast, even people with no academic predilections would have heard of Arendt's major work, and Adorno was often wrongly attacked by popular right-wing critics like PragerU. Despite that, Benjamin was one of the most important social critics of the 20th century. Benjamin put great value in his philosophy being a library of quotes. For Benjamin, what mattered was the minute details. While trained in philosophy, he cared little for the history of the academy and aimed to paint a picture of the present in all of its peculiarity. In Theses on the Philosophy of History, he quotes Nietzsche, "We need history, but not in the way a spoiled loafer in the garden of knowledge needs it." He continues, "Not man or men, but the struggling oppressed class itself is the depository of historical knowledge." For Benjamin, what mattered was the chaos of the present, not the idealization of the past or the future. What mattered were the tools of knowledge in the hands of the people, not the institutionalized elitism of the academy. The joy of reading Walter Benjamin is that most of his work is short, easily available, and beautifully written. On his birthday, here are the best places to look for his work and gain an appreciation for who he was in contrast to the popular names that always come up. There are two short collections of his translated works available called Illuminations and Reflections. Both contain a majority of his political and literary writings. Illuminations opens with an essay by Hannah Arendt on Benjamin's life, which is not only one of the best accounts of who Benjamin was, but is one of the best essays Arendt ever wrote. In my first aesthetics seminar, I was taught that one famous essay everyone was familiar with, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. In it, Benjamin argues for the lost historical character of art, dubbed aura. Out of all of his work, this particular piece makes clearest Benjamin's combination of mysticism, Marxism, and aesthetics. However, equally important, and in my experience rarely taught despite its importance, is Theses on the Philosophy of History, which discusses his idea of history and uses a sculpture of an angel to characterize the present as the debris of the past. Finally, the author as producer is where Benjamin discusses the role of the privileged and the character of art to make better people on the road to a better society. Here, Benjamin says having the right politics only matter if they make you a better person in the process. For me, Benjamin marked a refreshing, calming read in contrast to the other political thought I was exposed to. There were moments of quiet reflection, deep political critique, and sometimes bizarre humor. Benjamin is perhaps the best expression of what people think philosophers are, in tune with nature, poetic, and filled with short, helpful advice when one needs it the most. If all of philosophy indeed is a library of quotes like Benjamin thought, I'll leave you with one of my favorites. The only way of knowing a person is to love them without hope.